Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We are your hosts, Adriana M.A. and
Jackie Sanders. We are two art professionals sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
we talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop new episodes every Tuesday. Now, today's episode is kind of a celebratory one because in addition to talking about what we've been up to in our studio practices, we are also celebrating 3 years of the Level Up Artist Podcast. Woohoo! If we had a soundboard, we could put some crazy effects in there, but it is so crazy to think that we've been doing the podcast every single week for 3 years because it really has been quite the journey. Our first episodes airing on May 4th, Star Wars Day in 2021. So we wanted to just kind of take a quick look on how far we've come, how our creative careers have shifted, the successes we've had, some of the tough learning lessons that every creative business owner goes through, and just all the fun that we've had in the past 3 years. Just so crazy.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, we did start with the whole we're not doing this unless we do 100 episodes and over 160 episodes in, right? But to set the scene way back when, especially if this is the first time you're listening in, so we started bouncing ideas, around summer of 2020, give or take, the heaviest part of the pandemic. We were trying to keep ourselves sane, through all the uncertainty that was going on and the sad stuff, of course. But it took us a while to kind of conceptualize what our approach would be. Obviously, we can talk about all kinds of stuff, and we do in real life, but we wanted to kind of narrow down the focus a little bit. And so, January of 2021 is when we started recording. And let me tell you, it was hilarious. These are videos that will never see the light of day if I can help it. Like, we're sitting in Jackie's sofa in her apartment. We don't even know where to look at the camera. We're looking at each other, looking at the camera. We're not like talk show hosts. We don't know what we're doing. Anyways, it was hilarious. Finally, after several tries. Oh, and we kept laughing. It was really funny.
Yeah, well, that's
Okay.
still a problem
Okay.
sometimes. We definitely
Yeah.
get a case
Yeah.
of the giggles at times.
Oh yeah. Maybe I'll find the audio at some point. But yeah, we were laughing a lot. It was very cute. It was very sweet. But also at that time we had been at Art Space a little bit less than a year, so it seemed like, the perfect time to kind of start sharing some of our knowledge, through podcast media. And then that's kind of like art wise when we had started to kind of build some momentum as things started to open up a little bit. And when we were comparing notes on, the mentors and the important folks we had had in our lives and how they had impacted our art career up until that point, and we're having these great conversations and going, well, we know other artists have, from our discussions, some of the same questions. Is there a way that we can share some of this forward and maybe save someone, a little bit of time here and there. So anyways, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but um that was, kind of the seed, if you will, of us talking about the podcast back then. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that really is the core of everything. I mean, we say it in our introduction every week. We share forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journey. Because now, even thinking to where our creative careers were then, where we are now is honestly very, very different. But having that mindset of, okay, even if we're at, let's say, a level 2 or a level 3, where the scale is up to 1 million, essentially, there's still things that we could share with the level 1, right? So just having that community over competition mindset because we had so many artists around us that were generous, and just wanting to share that forward with listeners like you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I remember us having that discussion of, well, like, if it was 1 to 10, what level are we? And can we help someone in a different level from us? And honestly, the answer is yes. So it's been a lot of fun. And we've met people of other quote unquote, this is all abstract, of course, that we perceive to be in higher levels going, oh, I didn't know XYZ that you gals taught me. And we were like, oh, this anyway, it's very cool. And of course, there were other things we had to figure out for this podcast to be. Part of it was the technology, like I said, where to look at the camera, so many bloopers, how to edit bloopers. Oh my gosh. But at the end of the day, our biggest goal was to be able to share it forward with any artist who may need it. And I'm going to say low key, another thing was to help document some of the process in the meantime.
Mhm.
I don't know. It's really
Absolutely.
fun to look back and kind of see how things have evolved, how we've matured, right, in our artistic practices and our businesses. So anyway, so that's very cool too. But yeah, when we were isolated, we were definitely lucky to have each other.
Oh.
And we definitely kept going back to that idea of like, yes, this is a lot of work, but if we can help another artist, another creative feel a little less alone and maybe a little bit more supported in their journey, maybe save them a little bit of time instead of just endless rabbit holes on the internet. We've all done it. Then we thought the podcast was worth doing. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that I know we talked about early on as kind of a differentiator that we wanted for our podcast was that neither one of us necessarily claimed to be like the most expert digital marketer or the most expert fine artist, portrait artist, whatever, to where sometimes when I listen to other podcasts, it can almost feel so formal to the point where you question, like, are you even still making artwork? Do you even have your own business that you're talking about marketing in? Or are you just like positioning yourself as this marketing expert? And so we wanted to, obviously, we are both working artists. We are learning right alongside you guys, a lot alongside other professional artists. And the landscape is very different in today in May 2024 than it was in May 2021. I think that was another motivator because we had obviously all just been through this massive worldwide shift, still in the middle of it, really. And we acknowledge that keeping this as kind of a time capsule of sorts of what things are we working on? What do we want to get better at? What are wins that we had along the way and those tough lessons? And so since then, we've had over 160 episodes. This is episode 160. We've been doing it for 3 years, had listeners worldwide. In addition to the conversations just between us, had incredible guests of all mediums, avid collectors, curators, writers, authors. So many generous and interesting conversations with other professionals that are working right alongside us. So just feel very, very lucky.
I know we've had everything from, fresh off of college, actually might still be in college, artists, all the way to, let's see, what was your high school teacher when we talked to him? How many decades had he
Oh
been doing
man.
art?
I mean,
Like
definitely
six or
over
seven
40.
decades?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It was something, it was pretty much out there in terms of like art practices. So we've definitely had the range. It's been amazing. And of course, to this day, we still do it for you. So thank you for tuning in as always. We definitely thank you for your support. I mean, we do self-fund this, even if we say, for our sponsors, that's still us. Um, and of course, if you would like to help us along the journey, here comes the plug. You can visit levelupartist.com to become a podcast supporter. This will give you access to amazing off the record conversations that we love to have with our guests after the main taping is done, so to speak. Artist community platform, and it helps the podcast going. So yes, I had to throw that in there because yeah, that's what we do, and this is why we do it.
Yes, definitely a labor of love and self-funded. So we just love and appreciate the support because in addition to this podcast, we are also both, as we mentioned, working artists too, working right alongside you in this ever-evolving industry. So that's what we want to focus on as part of today's episode. If you want to go into the archives of all of our other podcast episodes, there's a long list of 159 of them for you to listen at. But today we're going to focus on how our art businesses have changed in the past 3 years, and kind of having another milestone of marking time where we are now. So, Adriana, 3 years ago, what were you doing in your art business? Paint the picture for us of where you were.
Well, and I want to make sure too, I want to do art business, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about the art practice as well, because I do know
Absolutely.
that some of our listeners, I mean, yes, we are business focused, we both are. I mean, that's part of what we wanted to do this podcast for, not just talk in the abstract about concepts and things, but we also wanted to talk into the, okay, but how do you actually do it and how do you actually get paid from it, right?
Yes.
That's part of what we do. So that being said, I know a lot of our listeners, maybe they're do it on the side or starting out and everything, but I do want to talk about the art practice as well. So I'll be
Absolutely.
sprinkling both of those in. To set the stage, there I was. Dot, dot, dot. I'm kidding. Um, so way back when, wow, 3 years ago, it feels like I don't know. I think you all probably have this too, or sometimes you feel like anything pre-pandemic was like 100 years ago, but also yesterday. I don't know.
hmm
It's kind of
It's
weird.
also strange because 4 years ago, just about, I mean, we started the podcast May 2021, but that
Yeah,
previous July is when we moved into art space. So it's almost like feels like
exactly.
a year into having a public facing studio. It's very
Yeah,
different
so we
time.
were still even transitioning to what that even meant, considering that when we moved in, even though it's a public facing studio, it wasn't then because of the pandemic. So we were also shifting
hmm
into like what is it like to talk to visitors in your studio? And it was like slowly opening. There was
Oh
some
yeah.
trial opens and then it closed again for a few months. Anyways, it was a lot of that. So we were navigating that as well. But at the time, I had been less than a year having a studio outside the home. And at the time, I shared a studio space with another wonderful artist. Hey, Barb, if you're listening. Um, so I was adapting not just to a space outside of home, I was also adapting to sharing a space, right? And trying to figure out when are you going to work, when am I going to work, etc. So
Mhm.
that had, and again, having the public come in, which I hadn't had that before. I was working in acrylics, some oils. I also wanted, or my big thing, I mean, it always will be. But anyways, my big thing around that time was I wanted to create a cohesive style, right? Something recognizable. I always heard you need to have your own art style, especially if you're going to have an art business. I'm a business major and I'm a marketing's my specialty. So I mean, I already knew that, right? Like that was already drilled into my head in business school. Like you need to niche down, right? You've all heard that stuff. So in my mind, I'm like, how do I niche down my art? I want to do all the things. I want to paint all the things. And also, I need to establish a website. I need to set up art business systems. I need to have sustainable business practices to go along with that. Like, what does it mean when somebody reaches out and says, I want to commission you for a piece? Like, I had a really early commission back then, navigating those timelines. What does that look like? Anyway, so a lot of the focus was spread, honestly,
hmm
between that cohesiveness and then the business side and the art practice side. So there was a lot to learn back then. Of course, one of the biggest goals was survive the pandemic. Sounds a
Goal
no-brainer
number
now, but that was a
one,
big deal back then.
survive.
Well, and it was also like, when can we go out? When cannot we go out? Like it just was so disruptive. But at the same time, since I was one of those artists that had things lined up that all got canceled, suddenly I had a lot more alone time practice. Anyway, so trying to strike a balance there. Um, while also trying to increase exposure, try to sell consistently, but how to do that when most of my sales at the time had been in person, right? So I wasn't prepared, like some other artists had already been selling online. I wasn't
hmm
prepared for that pivot at the time because I didn't have to before. I had a corporate job. Like this wasn't even a thing. So anyway,
hmm
so it's like navigating all those different changes. Yeah, that was definitely challenging. In terms of income, oh my goodness. Well, yeah, that was interesting. Uh, it's better than the previous year, but definitely not better than corporate, that's for sure.
I think that's a
I
big
did
thing
start,
for thinking of you back then. It was like you had just left your corporate job. which is
Yeah.
you're not just then pivoting into, okay, figuring out from an art business growth standpoint, but that's also just inevitably it's going to feel like a big hit to the gut when you don't
Oh, it
have
was.
that consistent paycheck coming in. So it's also adjusting to inconsistent paychecks in general, no matter what their size.
Yeah, inconsistent paychecks. Also the volatility of it, if like you can't produce your best work all the time, that's unreasonable. You can't be selling all the time either, that's unreasonable. It's just like trying to navigate those ups and downs. And through previous jobs I've had, I've worked in jobs where there's seasonalities to it where it's like hardcore. Like we're working, extra hours, we're working into the night kind of thing. And then it kind of slows down. And luckily, art mirrors that to a certain extent, but it's not set in quarters. It's not like, oh, at the beginning of this quarter, from this time to this time, it's heavy season. From this time to this time, it's middle of the road season. From this time to this time, it's kind of like relax a little bit. Art doesn't have those kind of deadlines. Um, Definitely doesn't work that way. So anyway, so it was like adjusting to those changes and also the income is just all over the place. At least it was in the beginning. And yeah, I was like trying to figure out where's the income going to come from, what income source is going to have, but also how can I attempt to monetize these things when I'm not ready? Like, I'm still trying to figure out what I'm about, what my art is about. So there was a lot of navigating that and being like self-confident to a certain extent, but also realistic of like where
Yeah.
my skill level was at the time and my income expectations had to be adjusted all the time. And that's fine. I mean, I feel like that's perfectly normal. But then
Mhm.
as the year progressed, back when we started the podcast, I did start selling a little more consistently, a little more than just covering my expenses, rent, gas, art materials, etc. So I felt really good. And then personal life, it definitely all really ties back to corporate. I think for some of you that may be listening, if you did like hardcore corporate America 9 to 5 type thing for many years, and I did it for over a dozen years, it's really hard to wean yourself off of how that works and how the routines, which can be helpful sometimes, how the routines kind of guide your life versus it's almost like you have guide rails in a way, and then once you take the guide rails away, you're like, where am I supposed to go? And there's no boss to telling you where to go. You are the boss.
Mhm.
And you don't, it's almost like, those when you see those job listings that say it's entry level, but also you need 10 years experience. And you're like, but it's entry level. Like I wouldn't have the experience. It's kind of like that in the beginning where you're like, how am I going to anticipate and make business decisions on something that I have zero experience on?
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
it, we just got to do it. We just got to do it. But anyway, so there's that. So yes, Jackie, let's turn it over. How about you 3 years ago? Jackie from three
Oh
years
man. Yeah, so 3 years ago, I think a lot of the similar trends are going to be mirrored when I look back on things that you mentioned, Adriana, and that I think both of us were doing a lot of things for the first time, which I think is kind of a good way to just kind of summarize as a whole where both of us were in that 2020, 2021, even into 2022 time frame. I had just been adjusting to uh working at a digital marketing agency for my day job. I was like I currently am still now a full-time artist with a full-time day job. The biggest shift for me though in 2021 was I had just shifted from an in-person, more like blue collar hourly wage job into a remote work job. I was kind of in my first 6 months when we started the podcast. So I was still learning the ropes, learning the ropes of what does remote work look like? What does this agency structure look like in a new industry, just in general? And so it was a lot of learning from my day job standpoint that also then translated to my art business. I was also just learning a lot in my art business, how to do this, should I be doing that? Um, I was also very newly single, gotten out of an 8-year relationship, which I don't think I mentioned when we launched the podcast. So I was also like living on my own for the first time in a long time. And it was really just this time period of overall doing things for the first time, new beginning, fresh starts, which definitely had its moments of being overwhelming, but I'm definitely someone who kind of leans into that mindset of rather than being scared of change, shifting it into more excitement. Especially because these were all shifts in my life that I've been actively pursuing. So, being at Art Space, kind of a little glimpse into the finances. My previous rent, when I first moved in, I was in a smaller studio, was just over $200 a month, which all the pricing at ArtSpace is totally transparent. You can find on the website, so I'm not like revealing any secrets here. But honestly, that felt absolutely huge at the time because I was working an hourly day job. And I honestly considered saying no for a minute because I was like, that is all of my spending money for the month. Like, no restaurants, no going out, like that is everything. Which obviously I took a minute, stepped back and said, no, it is worth it. I'm gonna make it work. I'll figure it out. And so
And
as
at the
someone
time, it
new,
was a shared studio, right?
yeah, so it's a shared studio, but my portion was just over 200. And so yeah, it was very scary. It was definitely a leap of faith. And as Adriana mentioned, in 2020 when I moved in, we were still closed to the public. So there wasn't like an instant increase in sales, but kind of went with that like, what's the worst that's gonna happen mindset. Worst that's gonna
Hmm.
happen is I can't make rent one month and they like kick me out and I'm gonna be shunned from the art world forever. Like, I don't know. But obviously that did not happen. We made it work. And by the time the podcast was launching in 2021, was just about a year after I moved in. And so I had just started prepping for actually moving to a bigger studio across the hall, which was another big jump of rent. But honestly, at the time, I really needed the space. My artwork was growing. I was making larger pieces, actually making a body of work, which frankly, I really had not done prior to Art Space. I had like one series, but a lot of them were 1 foot. I think the biggest piece I made was like 16-inch square. Like they were not huge solo exhibition worthy pieces. But with this space, I really proved to myself that I can do that. Like I was making a body of work. I had a solo exhibition, was starting to really focus on gaining that momentum, which I think was the biggest focus during that time, especially when the podcast was launching. Similar to you, Adriana, I really saw it as that lay the foundation for the long-term vision that I wanted it to be. It was really it from the outside looking in, you could see, oh, this is just like a small, simple step. But you and I have never been accused of dreaming small, that's for sure. And so
Never.
it was like, for some people, it may be like, oh, you just made like 3 stickers. And in my head, I'm like, no, this is the starting foundation of my art product line that I'm going to have in stores all along the East Coast. They're going to be in shops, they're going to be in museums, like they're going to take over the world. And so during that phase, I was really like laying that foundation work from researching community partners that I wanted to work with, researching just exhibition opportunities, also just creating artwork, creating, as you mentioned, Adriana, contract templates, creating administrative systems, establishing how am I going to price my work? Also thinking from a more, I mean, admin side, what are my company policies as an art business? Really going
Hmm.
from that hourly wage worker mindset to I'm the business owner now. What are my policies if someone comes back with artwork saying, actually, I changed my mind. I want to return this painting. Do I allow returns? Am
No,
I, do I have wholesale pricing options? Do
no.
I take commissions? I had never done a commission before. And I'm like, would I do that? Under what conditions? So there's really a lot of these big questions that if you're feel like you're maybe in that similar stage as a listener now, I really encourage you to take that time to almost think 3, 5, 10 steps ahead of where you are. Because once you know where you're going, it can make the short term questions and answers a lot more obvious and simple.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I feel like it was a very like thinking big thoughts, time of change, doing everything for the first time season.
Anything is
Um,
possible at this
anything's
stage.
possible, all the inspirational quotes. Like it was, I don't know, it's a pretty fun time. And obviously starting the podcast, we had never done that before. And so
Hmm.
we're like, well, what's the worst that could happen? We'll put out some episodes and no one will listen. It'll be fine. But yeah, I feel like it was at that time of just growth and opportunity. My goal really at that time was pursuing those opportunities, wanting to increase my income. Especially because, yeah, I really was paycheck to paycheck in my art business. I had started out with like $500 in a bank account from my day job and said, this is all the money I'm putting into my art business. Let's see how long it lasts. Which on previous episodes, we kind of talk a little bit about finances and maybe we could do a future episode. But I found that being able to track that was super helpful in that I knew, okay, if I sold pieces, I would just reinvest it right back into my business. Granted, it was going into art materials and to rent, but that was my version of, okay, just keeping I can make it one more month. Okay, great. I can make it one more month. We did it. Um, yeah, and there was really never a time, which I feel like it's a big win looking back at how tight things were financially, that there was never a time when I had to take from my personal bank account that I couldn't repay it within like 1 week. So obviously different situations, different financial situations are different, but there are definitely stressful months and moments for sure. But I think being on track, again, establishing a finance system in the business was super, super important early on. But yeah, life looks a lot different right now. I guess the easiest way to give a studio update is for us to, now that we've established where we were in 2021, to look back at how things have really changed over the past 3 years. So, Adriana, how does your art and art business look different now compared to 3 years ago?
So I'm like a millionaire now, and I live
We're
in
just
the
rolling
valley.
in
I'm just kidding.
it.
I'm just kidding. I just had to. Sorry. If any of you that knows me in real life, you know I'm a goofball. No, not a millionaire yet. Thank you very
Yes.
much. I kid, I kid. Reality check. So, sometime during those 3 years, I did move studios into one that was slightly larger than my half of
Mhm.
the other studio. On the main hallway, just like Jackie, just a few studios down, a lot more visible of a spot, and across from an exhibition space. And honestly, I absolutely adore it. That's the background if you're looking in on YouTube. Um, so it's been super duper helpful, and I've also gotten really lucky with the quality of artists that are around it. I mean, it literally takes a village, so it's been fantastic. It did mean like obviously other commitments in terms of rent and things like that, kind of like what Jackie mentioned, but worth the investment, 100%. Humble opinion, humble opinion. In terms of income streams, I will say there's definitely been a change there as well. So back then, I was mostly relying on like in-person sales of just original art, a commission here and there sprinkled in between. And then I did dabble into prints for some time, but didn't really like how that went. Um, I think I did, once things started opening up, I did a few more in-person events. Honestly, that's not my jam. I'm introverted, that's way too many people for the most part. Like, I'd rather do a group exhibition where people are there to buy art than a market where they're there to buy a candle and a mug and a shirt, and you get my gist. That's way too many people to talk to for me. So anyway, so there was a lot of that experimentation of like, does this work for me? Does this work for my personality? Does this work for my art? Does this work for my art pricing? Like that's when I was like discovering certain types of markets is for art of a certain price point. And if I'm not willing to make art of that lower price point for some of the markets, then it's not worth it me being there. I'd rather pivot that time and that effort into doing something else. Like, for example, teaching a workshop or teaching summer camp for kids or things of that nature. And then with time came adding ceramic sculpture, which has been amazing and I'm super grateful for, as well as murals. I still do workshops, not as many as I used to, mainly because of all the prep that it goes with and all the all the energy, social energy that it can take sometimes, but I really love it and I still do it. And coming up this summer, I have another mural camp for kids, so that's gonna be awesome. So there's been a lot of that pivoting, for sure. A lot of like they say, what is it? Throw it at a wall and see if it sticks kind of situation. Kind of like Jackie said, like I think we both started with that anything goes mentality, like very optimistic, very positive. We still are, don't get me wrong. But then it became okay, try this, step back, evaluate. Does it work? Does it not work? Do we back burner it? Or is it something that I can, back burner, revisit later, or we're just going to cut it out? And honestly, we have some of our studio updates episodes where that is exactly what we go into, or year-end episodes where we kind of go into what we're not doing again, or not for a while. And I'm glad we did. I'm glad we were both cognizant enough to do that kind of stuff. So that was cool. In terms of art style, shift and evolution, yes, I got to that cohesive level, which I'm super, super happy about, of course, and being able to translate it into other mediums. But of course, being content, we are a little ambitious. So I always had like this dream of like, I want to go bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So it involved, amongst other things, modifying my style slightly from the way that I had started with a few years ago, which makes sense, to do it in such a way that it would translate into other media, but as well into other scales. And scale is a whole nother bag of chips, let me tell you. So that's also when I started investing into specialized workshops and even artist residencies so that I could start diving a little deeper and have a focus more on it's okay that I'm not in production mode because honestly, about 3 years ago, that was my big thing. And for you to get to your style, you have to produce. There's no shortcut. You got to make to get through the, cruddy stuff to get to the good stuff. But once I was like, ooh, like, I like the style that has emerged and I feel like I can continue with this for a long time, it became, what else can I put this on? Kind of like Jackie talking about putting stickers everywhere. My mind was like, okay, walls. I want to see my paintings not just on a canvas. I want to see it on a wall. Um, Also, what would it look like on a sculpture? Or better yet, what if my painting was a sculpture? Like, what does that even look like? Anyway, so there was a lot of exploring in that and a resistance to doing rinse repeat. Not a judgment, by the way. If any artist feels like that is exactly what they do and that's how they pay their bills, you know what? That's awesome. You have your system, you figured it out, go for it. More power to you. But the type of like creative that I am, I can't do that. I can't be like, oh, I painted the series of birds. I'm making it up for a sec. I painted the series of birds. I love bird paintings, by the way. I'm not hating on anybody. But now I'm known as the bird painter, and that's all I'm gonna do. That's not me. No, y'all. Like I need to keep going, like, and then this, and then this, and then this, but without getting lost in the noise. So definitely been a challenge, but anyways, I think I've narrowed it down pretty good. I hope. I hope we'll see. Ask me in 3 years. Goals wise, I will say I did hit a lot of my goals that I had set about 3 years ago. Art's funny, and especially setting goals during the pandemic. It's not like a corporate or other kind of jobs where you have a preset trajectory. Like, oh, now I'm gonna go to med school, right? And then I'm gonna do pre-med, and then I'm gonna do internships, and then I become a doctor, and then I do this and that, right? Like, it's not like there's preset milestones for you to do. You can look at other artists and get some ideas, but at the end of the day, everybody's is completely different. So a lot of the goals that I set back then, some of them were a little more abstract than others, but a lot of it had to do with things that I felt were a little more tangible, like in terms of how many paintings I'm going to create, right? or how much income I want to bring in the door, or how many exhibitions I want to do. And I tried to set things that were a little bit more tangible. And I'm happy to report in the last 3 years, most of those things I'm like, check, check, check. Not without a lot of effort, blood, sweat, and tears, of course. But I don't know. It's given me like this new win like I don't know, new energy of like, okay, now that I got those, where else can I take this? Where else can they go? How can I continue to expand my art business, not just in terms of income, which I feel like that's a relatively easy one for everybody to think about, but
Mm.
also the art itself and how it could evolve. And then while thinking about it, online presence. I can't forget about that. That one's always on the horizon.
You the
This one
eye
where I'm like,
roll if anyone's not looking on YouTube, the
oh,
eye roll of online presence. It's always
that's the
that
one where it's
lingering
like,
like third facet to where I think you kind of nailed something there, Adriana. That I mean, we kind of talk about in other episodes, but thinking of you have the hat that you're wearing as the artist, where you're like evolving a body of work, creating the series. You have the hat of business owner, right? Looking at the finances, look at overhead, look at all the strategic plan, the quarterly goals. And then
yep,
it's the marketer. Okay, how are you connecting with your audience? What are you saying? What do they need to know? It's really those three different hats that, of course, the goal is always to balance them. They all go through phases of being like the voice at the discussion table. But they're all always present.
yeah. And then the fourth one, let's not forget, it's the personal life because
True.
you can't just do art 24/7 or 7 days a week. Been there, done that. Don't
Even
do
though
it.
some people try, we've all had phases of that. Guilty.
Oh my gosh. Yes, been there, done that, not worth it. But anyways, that's a story for later on. But yeah, I think now kind of tying back to the whole like, okay, I've hit certain goals. Where else can I take this? How else can this expand? I've started to also look, which makes me a little sad, but we got to talk about it, kind of like what the next phase is after our studio leases run out. So the building that we're in, which makes sense, and I love that they do this, by the way, to always make space for others, right? We do have limits on how long we can be there for. Perfect sense. So in my mind, I've been like thinking of where am I going to go next? Am I going to stay in the local art community that I love, like friends and collectors and things like that? Or the mountains are calling, still in the same state, but a little bit farther out. Am I going to move to Asheville? That's kind of part of the plan. Um, so anyway, so kind of looking at what does that look like? How could that change my art practice? How is that going to change the way I present myself online or in person? Anyways, there's a lot of big questions. It's kind of exciting. I mean, scary, but also exciting kind of in the way it was about 3 years ago, where there's so many questions on, I don't know how this could go. So there's a lot of parallels there. But we've survived the last 3 years, so the next three should be pretty good. That's the plan. And then only other thing I would add to the whole, change between then and now would be as I progress through, my life, the normal stuff, but also like the art career side of it. I've been trying to be like mindful of all the different plates I've added to my art business and art practice, and that's something saying yes to a lot of things, but trying to observe without judgment at least a few times a year. Just try to sit back and go, okay, which things are supporting my business and need to stay? Which things, whether I like them or not, but they need to stay. Which ones feed my art practice and continue the evolution? Because I never, ever, ever, ever want to feel like I'm stuck in one thing. Rinse, repeat. I'm allergic to it, apparently. And which ones take too much bandwidth? And what are we gonna do about it? Right? Are they gonna back burner? Are we gonna let them coast for a little bit? Are we gonna snip? Anyway, so a lot of pivot, 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 but I feel like last 3, 4 years, since leaving corporate have been huge. I mean, I've been learning a lot of like, what I don't like, what serves me and what doesn't. And
Mhm.
yeah, it's a lot. How
Yeah.
about you, Jackie?
I think to your point, kind of looking back at the journey over the past 3, 4 years, um, because yeah, to your point, we are kind of in our second of 2/3 of time at Art Space for our leases. So we've been there about 4 years. We'll be there for about another two, which is a long time, but also no time at all. And so thinking back to that time of everything was new, everything was exciting, like we were just trying everything. And now it's like, well, we had to fall on our face a couple times, learn, okay, I really like this, I don't like this. Now we have that information to make decisions off of, which I feel like is kind of that next tier of, well, you don't like working on pieces that are 3 inches big. Why would you agree to do that? Or you don't like working this big. Why would you do that? So I don't know. I feel like it is a fun phase looking back over the last 3, 4 years on a lot of those learning lessons because it has, I think, instilled that confidence in myself, definitely, but I can probably say for both of us in where we are now. Because looking back, or kind of looking to where I am now, I'm in that same large studio space. I absolutely love it. It was a very scary decision when I first moved in, but best decision I ever made. I absolutely love the studio. It'll be very sad when I leave, because I feel like I've really been able to expand the body of work that I make. My aesthetic is still pretty similar to what I was making back then. A lot of abstract geometric pieces, bold colors, sharp geometric lines. But really the concepts and especially like the introspective journaling that's part of my creative process has of course evolved as I've evolved in my personal life. And I think really being able to lean into that as part of my art making practice has been a big shift for me in my work. Um, Kind of similar to you, Adriana, I think my from a income stream standpoint or just from like a bodies of work standpoint, um, I'm really just expanding on the foundation that I did set 3 years ago. So creating additional bodies of work of paintings, expanding my art product line into new products. So back then I had window hanging color catchers, which I still do now. But I also have custom versions of those. I've turned them into corporate awards for nonprofits. I've created a series of journals because I love journaling in my creative process. So having branded journals, stickers, just a whole bunch of things. Um, Also, then from a public art standpoint, back in 2021, Adriana and I both had done like a temporary art installation with the town of Garner.
Yep.
That was like a public art project, super fun to work with.
Baby
But it was
mural.
temporary. Yeah, it was temporary and it was a smaller price point, which at the time I was honestly just excited to get the experience. And it was a great foot in the door for that kind of a mural experience. But since then, I've been able to get larger scale murals, larger price point murals, and having multiple of them under our belt at this point, just more experience with what I like, what I don't like. Same with teaching. A few years ago, I was really starting to get my foot in the door with teaching, both through our Level Up Artist membership, but also in-person events. I was talking to classes at my alma mater, Virginia Tech, online, doing in-person workshops starting in 2022. And a lot of those I was honestly just doing for free or relatively low cost, because I love doing it. And I knew I wanted to get experience public speaking, going in front of groups, going in front of like the Rotary Club, just to talk about myself and my work. And if anyone wants a painting, to come to my studio. All like unpaid speaking events that I've then now recently been able to get paid to do, which is very helpful when you gain that confidence of, oh, well, I've done this before, so now I feel almost better charging for it. Um, and also, kind of artwork wise, getting off of the wall has been really, really fun. So in addition to creating original paintings, the one thing that's like 100% brand new in my work has been creating like pedestal or tabletop sculptures. So they're still in the works, still in the experimentation phase, but I'm very excited for where they're coming. So definitely coming soon. And hopefully we'll be seeing them on my Instagram in the next couple of weeks. But I don't know, kind of looking back, I think one of the biggest things, in addition to just art style or art series expansion, is from that kind of elevating the income stream standpoint. So, for transparency's sake, Q4 of 2023 was the first time that I personally had paid myself out of my art business. Kind of thinking of that milestone as it takes 3 to 5 years for new startup companies to become profitable. Up until that point, I had been reinvesting all of that money into the business. So hitting that milestone at about 4 years, acknowledging of, okay, I can actually pay myself from my art bank account into my personal bank account was a super, super big deal for me and my business. Now, everyone sets up their art finances differently, and that's probably a whole other episode, or you can honestly just DM me on Instagram or send me an email, and I'll be happy to chat with you on how I personally set them up on finance strategy, because we are not financial experts.
We are not.
But whatever your kind of like finance goal is in your business, is personal to you, what you want, and kind of how you want your business to run. So that was a big one that I was pushing for me. So having hit that last year was a huge goal. But in addition to like the art making, the finances, kind of looking at that trifecta of looking at then my personal life,
Mhm.
a huge goal of mine now is one that I've been able to, I feel like, accomplish recently, but it's always a work in progress, is really finding that healthy balance between super hardcore hustling, hitting milestones in my day job career, and shockingly, having a personal life, a crazy concept. So juggling art business, day job, and personal life is kind of always the goal. Because I am still at a day job, working in remote and digital marketing, having friends, new relationships, and just feeling more stable and settled and grounded. I don't know if that's a element of getting older, being more established in my career. But just thinking about the time at Art Space, similar to you, Adriana, I think when I first moved in, understandably, it was very much of that like hustle manifestation of a little bit of anxiety that I need to prove myself. I both prove myself to other people, but frankly, also prove to myself that I can do this. I've always kind of been someone who sets big goals and goes after it. And part of it, yeah, it was proving it. Look, no, I am an artist. I have an art business. Look, I'm doing this. I'm doing that. I'm doing that. But a lot of it was also proving to myself that I could do it, that this was a priority in my life, that this is something that made me happy, and not making excuses as to why I wasn't hitting milestones. But now I just feel a little bit more settled. I'm definitely pushing towards big goals, but I feel less drive from an anxious standpoint and more from a excitement, like confidence standpoint. So similarly, thinking to that time after Art Space 2 years from now, really trying to get in that dream establishing mindset again, kind of similar to how I was 3, 4 years ago of what do I want my dream life to look like? Where am I going to be? What am I going to be doing? And back then, a lot of it involved having a studio at Art Space, the big dream of having public murals, of having partnerships in the community, of connecting with fellow artists and sharing forward advice and business lessons to them. That was part of my dream. And here we are, we're living it, and it's amazing. But now it's kind of like, okay, well, once you hit one dream, you have to reassess and say, okay,
Yep.
well, what is my new dream? Doesn't mean I'm like completely quitting what I'm doing now, but what's the next evolution? So trying to embrace getting back into that dreamer mindset, which I think is a healthy, inevitable undulation of life, of business, life as an artist. And just thinking about what does my future dream life look like? What do I need to do in order to get there? And then taking action on those things.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So many parallels. Absolutely. Yes, 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 and yes. But before we keep going on this one, next up, we're going to be talking about some of the toughest lessons we learned in the past 3 years and the kind of advice we give our younger selves, when we were getting started. But first, we want to put in, you guessed it, a quick word from our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by our Level Up Artist courses.
We understand that life as a modern artist can be both exciting and overwhelming. Plus, there's a lot of information out there. So, what do visual artists actually need?
We've spent countless hours of trial and error, weeding through tons of information to find the gold, so you don't have to waste your time going down those endless rabbit holes.
In addition to weekly calls, we have created video course modules to cover everything from artist documents to exhibition prep, social media to technology, sales strategies, artist mindset, PDF resources, templates, and so much more.
Ready to get started? Head on over to levelupartists.com to learn more, get immediate access, and level up your career today. Welcome back, everyone. So, Adriana, what are some of the lessons you've learned the past 3 years since we started the podcast?
Woo-hoo. Too many to list, so we're gonna go with a few highlights. So I feel like this one was definitely a tough lesson, especially at the very, very beginning. Mainly because even though I had been doing art and taking art classes since I was a kid, I didn't go to actual art school. I went to business school. So I never got to do the sample of like all these different mediums, all these different styles as part of an education. I did it more for fun. So I didn't have the structure for it, right? So I was just experimenting, always trying new things, always constantly shifting. And it kind of conflicted with my desire to find my style because you can't find your style if you're always shifting stuff around, right? So that was really hard at first, and I had to learn that if I wanted to do this as more than a hobby, like this was the reason I left corporate after all, I would have to narrow it down. I just didn't know how. So it took me consulting the right people, and yes, this is hard. Again, I'm gearing this back towards like way back when, 3 years ago, but it is really hard to find the right people to talk to. A lot of online gurus out there. We're not even going there. Or some folks set in their ways. We've all been there. But it was hard to like find the right people, which luckily I did, to help me with mentorship as well as, interacting with seasoned artists that I could ask focus questions of. So having the business background was actually very helpful, believe it or not, in being able to ask very specific questions out of some of these folks. This is like pre-podcast. Some of you have heard me say the story before of like interviewing other artists and being like, okay, but how do you make this a business? Like, how do you actually get paid from it? And some of that early insight that I got was extremely helpful. But a lot of it I was like, okay, that's cool, but not what I'm asking for, which is fine. So you will have to kind of filter through some of that
Mhm.
um to
Or
kind of
filter
help you.
through 160 podcast episodes of information.
Those are already filtered. Those are already good. We're
But
talking like
applying it
millions
to
of
you and
videos
your
on YouTube.
business.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
we're talking like millions of videos on YouTube information. We already distilled it for y'all. Like, yeah, you're good. You're good with that stuff. Kidding. I'm not kidding. No, no, no. And this is also like why we have such a wide range of podcast guests as well. Like you get to hear from all walks of life, all stages. But at the time, like before we started the podcast, like I didn't have that. I came from corporate, and none of my corporate friends, as far as I'm aware, did art in any way, shape, or form, other than doing a Pinterest tutorial or something on YouTube they did with their kids for fun. Which again, nothing wrong with that, but that was not the area of the quote unquote art world that I was gearing towards. I had no examples. I had no one to ask. So it took a while for me to find the right people that had a similar mindset that could help me go, Adriana, you got to narrow it down. Like nobody told me you had to narrow it down. Everyone's like, oh yeah, try everything. I'm like, no, I needed the people that were like, no, actually, you got to cut that back. And that's when Peter, if you're listening, Peter Rue, one of my earlier mentors was like, no, we're going to put limitations in there. It sounds counterintuitive, but limitations are liberating. Yes, experiment has its place, but we need to narrow the distractions of all these different mediums, all these different colors, all these different things, and kind of dial it back to the basics a little bit. It'll make it a lot faster to learn if you dive deeper in certain areas, and that will help you figure out, is this for me or not? And then you can move on faster to the next thing. And I think that's what I was missing. That key ingredient of narrowing down, not just because I want to limit myself, narrowing down because I want to get through it and see, is this for me, yay or nay, move on. But I didn't know I had to narrow down. So by doing sampling all these different things like a buffet, I would have eventually gotten there. It would have taken a lot longer though, because it would have taken a lot longer to progress in each of 10 different things to find out at which point one of them was not for me, if that makes sense. As opposed to one didn't work out, next. One didn't, two, and you just kind of move on. Anyways, so that was like a giant lesson that I learned early on. And again, it took the right people to do this. Nothing online told me about this, but hey, if you're listening to us, I'm sharing this with you. Hopefully, I'll help you if you're there. But yeah, I didn't have that advice anywhere else. The second, you've heard us talk about this. If you've listened to our podcast before, you can scroll back through the episodes. Burnout is real. Burnout is so real. Oh my gosh, burnout is so, so real. The synthesis of it, I won't tell you the whole story because it's happened more than once. You live, you learn. I don't know if workaholic is the correct term for it, but I did get to a point where I was working 6 to 7 days a week throughout the whole day, whether at home or in the studio, it didn't matter. I was always working. And would only take a couple days off, like when literally I just couldn't take it anymore, right? Like my body would be like, we're tired, we're not going today. Like it was just getting to that level just once or twice a week or a month, actually. So physically and mentally, I mean, short sprints, sometimes seasonal, like the holiday season makes sense if you're prepared for it and you have months in advance to prepare for it and you know it's coming, but doing it all the time is not sustainable in any way, shape, or form. So once you get burned out, like just tired, just like blame mode, man mode, whatever you want to call it, it's really hard, both physically and mentally, to do any decent work, let alone getting into the creative groove where you do your best work, right? So don't listen to all those like Hollywood stories of, fill in the blank artist was like hitting the bottom of the bucket and they had problems with substances and all kinds of stuff. Will let you fill in the blanks on all the stuff Hollywood will fill your head with. Yeah, no, 99.99% of everybody else, you can't function that way. Um, yeah, so don't even try that path. You need to be healthy. You need to be healthy. You need to be rested. You need to give your brain time to absorb all the information and then kind of put it into practice, and your body needs time to, etc. So it took a while. I think the biggest pivot point for me was starting to track my time. um, I was not that good at it at first, but over the past couple of years, I've definitely gotten a lot more disciplined with it, where I could hold myself accountable and see, okay, this week I worked X hours, and this is how much I did in admin, this is how much I did in artwork, this is how much I did in other tasks related to art world, right? I don't track things like, oh, I went and worked out or I watched TV. Like, I'm not gonna put that stuff in. It was just like all related to art. Um, but it was helpful because then that let me adopt the mindset of, if I get to a certain number of hours a week, and we've talked about this on the podcast, the whole don't be a bad boss to yourself mentality. If I get to a certain number of hours a week, why would I force myself to work all that extra, possibly leading to burnout, when reality is, if an employer asked me to work 80 hours a week and no overtime, I'd be like, bye. Like, no, and probably a lawsuit. We're not doing that, right? Like, it doesn't work that way. So why would you do that to yourself? So it took some time to get to that point where by seeing the hours in black and white on my phone tracker, Clockify, it's free, by the way. No, I don't get paid to say that. Obviously, and we have episodes on time tracking, but it got me to see that, okay, for this season of my art business, I need to be a little busier. Maybe I can take a step back a little bit. When I reach a certain number of X hours for the week, I get to step back. The train, the bus, whatever you want to call it, has left the station. It's time to stay home, rest, go catch up on shows, go catch up with friends, go outside, whatever. But the art stuff can wait until you roll back the time on Monday or Sunday, if that's your preference, right? Whenever your week starts again, you need to take a break, essentially. So that was helpful. And scheduling time off honestly seems like a no-brainer, but I will say this for those of you that do not have other careers alongside it, or perhaps like don't have kids, that have a set routine or routine schedule, or spouses that you need to deal with their set routine schedules. If you're not dealing on a weekend versus weekend mindset, honestly, it all squishes and blends together. And that's honestly what happened to me. Half of the time, I don't even know what the day of the week it is because I don't have weekends. It doesn't matter. I work throughout the week, and weekends too. So it took kind of going, and we have some older episodes on this where I was like, at one point I had Wednesdays was like my relaxation day, or just my art making day, or maybe it was Sundays. It kind of switched around over the last 3 years, but basically being intentional about saying, oh, I remember that. Jackie reminded me to put vacations on my calendar. She's like, did you put it on your calendar yet? I'm like, yes, I guess. I mean, trying to at least do half a day. It sounds silly, y'all, but
You need
when
to do
you
it.
love, oh yeah, when you love what you do so much and it integrates into your everyday life and it permeates everything that you do, and everything can be inspirational and everything can be an idea for something else strategy wise. Like, you can't like, there's no blinders to it, then it's really hard to separate. So it took a while to be like, okay, I can't separate. And I have to acknowledge, as a personality thing or neurodivergent thing, I can't separate my personal from my art for the most part. They're very meshed together. And I don't think they'll ever separate again. They've kind of morphed into one. But I can intentionally say, okay, cool, but I need a time off where I can watch some British mystery show on Netflix and like not think about art related stuff, except when I see that painting in the background that I took a screenshot of because I want to look who the artist is. But for the rest of the show, it's not art related. It's something else that still feeds my inspiration in some other way, or it's just entertainment, and that's fine. So there's that. And then last but not least, because dear Lord, we can keep going on this. Um, is something that, like, I will say too, lessons wise, tough lessons wise, that I used to struggle with, that I feel like I don't now, but it took a while. Mostly early on. I don't know if you've all heard this concept of like workshop tourists, but I definitely was one at one point. I was always doing workshops. So I think part of it had to do with my insecurity that I didn't go to art school, aka I wasn't a properly trained artist. I say in quotation marks. So I needed to make up for it by taking as many workshops as possible to fill the knowledge gap, even though I had already been painting and taking classes since I was a kid. But there was like this sense of, no, 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 I need to catch up, which is silly. Everybody's training is different. It doesn't matter if you went to art school or not, not for art, maybe for heart surgery, but definitely not for art. It doesn't matter if you did it or not. So I kind of got distracted in the beginning a lot by just taking more classes, more techniques for the tool belt. Like, I need more. I need to absorb more. I need to learn more. And especially if the class or the platform was reasonably priced, yeah, add it to the cart. Like, I just, like, there was no filtering. Is this right for me and my goals? It was just like, that sounds good. Add it. Um, Took a while to get to the solution, but now the approach is a little different. Like, if it's a super varied form, this is what I can impart to anybody that maybe is feeling a little bit similar in their journey, is if you're going to YouTube, Skillshare, TikTok, Pinterest, it doesn't matter. and you're bombarded by all these different things. God forbid, ads on Instagram. I get them all the time. This new workshop, this new class. And some of them are free. I mean, some of them are reasonably priced, which is very tempting. Now I try to kind of go in with a plan and focus on finding what I actually need instead of just browsing and adding to a wish list, right? Or screenshotting, like, oh, I'll get back to that later. Not worth it. It's more of a, instead of it being presented to me, I'm like, okay, cool. I'll just kind of try to turn a blind eye to it and I'll go to it when I'm ready, if that makes sense. So part of what helped with that was writing down some goals for my art, kind of what I wanted to first, kind of narrowing down what I didn't want to do. Like early on, I realized watercolors and I don't get along. It doesn't mean we won't at some point. It just meant it's not a priority for me. It's not enjoyable. Why am I watching this 45-minute watercolor workshop? You know where I'm going with that? Like, at least watch something that could, even if it's not your thing, could potentially feed into your practice and not something like out of left field necessarily. So, and then now it's distracting. And should I buy gouache? You know where I'm going with that? Anyway, sounds very ADHD. Yeah, that's me. But essentially trying to put some goals, define what I want first, then actually go search for it, letting my internal compass lead the way. And yes, I do take workshops. I definitely encourage people to take workshops. We have an episode on workshops and finding the right workshop for you. So please, please, please check those out in our catalog. But just doing it with that mindful eye of how could this help, whether it's to get me out of a funk, it happens to everybody. Is that the purpose of that workshop, or is it to actually add a technique? Or basically, like going in within eyes wide open, like, what do I want to get out of this thing before I even start it? Before I even add it to the cart or the wish list or screenshot it, what do I actually think I want to get out of this, and how does it tie with my art? Anyways, long-winded answer. But yeah, those are some of the toughest lessons I've learned. Two of those definitely took a while in the beginning to get through. But yeah, yeah, Jackie, that was a lot. Sure.
Yes, man. I mean, I can definitely relate to those, to be honest. Like that endless experimentation loop, um, resisting burnout, even though you're like, I really want to keep working, but I know it's bad for me, but I'm just gonna keep doing it anyway. We've all been through that. And yeah, kind of realizing early on that having workshops or goals for your workshops can be super helpful. As someone who did go to art school, I definitely, even hearing you talk about workshops, I can remember back to classes of like, why did I pick this discipline class? Because like, I think it's interesting when other people do it, but I never want to do this. So why am I in a workshop or in an entire semester class about it? Is wild. So I can definitely relate to those. Let's see. Tough lessons I've learned over the last few years. I will try to keep it brief, but we get very excited when we talk about these things. I think the first thing that I would say would be honestly something that came to my mind last weekend when I was getting my studio ready for our first Friday event that happens every month is my advice would be to don't overcommit on shipping supplies too early in your creative journey. Because that was one of the tough lessons that I learned, even though I knew it at the time. And I thought that even the amount that I was buying was like a conservative amount, it was still way too much. Like I should not have bought it. So, it was when my color catchers were first like launched on my website, which at the time my newsletter, I hilariously say was like 5 people. It was like my
Me.
mom. Yeah, it was like my mom, Adriana, my boyfriend at the time, and then like 2 email addresses that were both me, but I just wanted to get to 5. And so I put like my old school email address and my personal email address on my own newsletter that I was writing. So either way, though, I was making this big announcement that I was launching color catchers in my business, and I was very excited for it. So I bought, I don't even remember what the breakdown was, but basically there's like manila padded folders that have like the bubble inside. I was like, well, if
That's
I
simple.
buy a bigger quantity, then I get a like it's cheaper per package. So from a business standpoint, that's very smart, right? Like I want to do good business decisions. I'm going to do that. I think I ended up buying like 250, which at the time I was like, well, these are just going to be flying off the shelves. I'm going to have to restock these like in no time. I literally still have these to this day. I ship other things in them as well now. But even when I thought I was being like conservative with how many I needed, it was way too much. So my advice would be to don't overcommit on buying shipping supplies too early. It turned out most people like buying them when they see them in person, and then they don't need shipping containers, obviously.
Price.
And it turns out when people are buying them online, I've now learned they end up buying multiple, which is great. And we love that. But the size envelope that I bought only fits one. So if they buy multiple, I end up having to use a different package anyway. So I can't even use them for that. So again, that would have been a great thing for me to learn before I bought all the supplies for it. So if anyone needs that size for like a 12-inch piece to fit inside, let me know and I can maybe we can strike a deal.
Maybe you should
But
put them on
yes,
Facebook Marketplace.
there we go. That could be it. I mean, honestly, I might because right now they're like in a whole huge box in my storage of artwork. So yeah, just keeping that in mind. I think kind of a more general lesson of that would just be yes, it's good to be money conscious. Yes, it's good to like think of large scale systems or the price of your packaging as you grow as a business, but don't get too ahead too quickly before you really learn what your audience wants, what your audience needs, what you need for shipping, and that kind of thing. So keep it in mind, but avoid having excess inventory on hand when possible. And that includes products such as stickers or prints. Like, yes, you want to have a handful on hand for when you go to markets or when you have an event, but there's rarely a time when you need like 12,000 of them before you ever have sold one, right?
Mhm.
With time, you can then anticipate purchases. But that's at a different phase of your business than I was 3 years ago. So I think the other lesson that I would really kind of emphasize would be as a emerging artist at the time to really a tough lesson for me was acknowledging and embracing my creative energy. Um, because being in a public facing studio, it took me a while to realize like what was this creative shift that was happening. Because in my type A brain, I was like, well, I make artwork at home and now I'm making it in this public facing studio. It's just the exact same process in this new space, right? Very much wrong. It definitely shifted my relationship to the work, not worse or better, but just different. Also having the idea of a studio where you are being perceived as you are making work, which if you don't have a studio, the idea of like I have a large window in my studio, and so visitors from the public can come look in my window if I'm in the studio during the day, and like watch me actually make paintings. There's other artists that can come by and say hello, which is amazing. And as an extrovert, I love it. But that's a very different mindset for me to be in versus prior to having that studio, I would be in my apartment. It would be early in the morning. It would like no one would be around. I'd be able to journal. I had my tea. I had snacks on hand all the time. So I think the biggest lesson was acknowledging and embracing that your creative energy changes throughout your career. Like based on the space that you're in, based on how much time you're making art, but also um then shifting your schedule to accommodate that shift in energy. I think I really learned that I can't make my quote unquote best art during the day when there's people talking on the phone outside my studio or visitors coming in or even just like other people really being loud in the building, not obnoxiously loud, but just like existing loud. It shifts my mindset as an artist. And if you're a fellow creative, you can probably feel that. or understand that. Like I can't really define what that energy is, but you're like it's shifted, it's gone, I lost it. The muse left the building. They're never coming back again. So rather than just being sad about that, realizing, well, if that is the case, I'm probably going to have to prioritize making artwork in the morning or making artwork in the evening. Otherwise, I can't say, well, the energy's gone forever. I guess I'm not making artwork anymore. Um, because really, as a business owner and as creatives, our job is to better understand ourselves. Because as artists, we're making the product being artwork. So it's almost a sense of like product quality control of like what are the best conditions in which this product can be made. And therefore you have to like be introspective, realize, well, when am I making the best art and acting accordingly? So that was definitely a hard lesson for me to learn and is definitely ever evolving. But kind of have grace with yourself, acknowledge the shift in energy, and control the things you can control or change your patterns as you have space to change them. Um, and then I think one thing that I used to struggle with, but I don't as much now, was that idea that I can't do everything at one time, which sounds so obvious. And I kind of talked about it earlier. Maybe it's an element of me just like getting older and accepting that like the idea of just like hustling 24/7 or even getting close to that point of burnout isn't worth it because spoiler alert, I've experienced that burnout many, many times and learned from experience that like, I don't want to do that again. That was not fun. Um, so I also acknowledge that like I do pride myself both as a artist, as a business owner, but just as a person in general on my work ethic. It was instilled in me at a very young age as an athlete, to take pride in my work ethic. But as a business owner, putting on that entrepreneur hat, there is always going to be more things to do. There's always going to be marketing that you can do. There's always going to be more artwork that you can make. Like there's the to-do list never ends. And I think that's the one thing that I just learned to accept consciously, but also like really feeling that in my day-to-day life. Because there is that difference between being busy and being productive that I think I had to learn versus like, and we've talked about this on other podcast episodes, where rather than constantly checking off things on my to-do list, now I feel like I'm constantly assessing my to-do list and prioritizing tasks, saying, okay, what is the highest and best use of my energy right now? What is the thing that absolutely has to get done versus what would be a thing that would be like cool if it gets done, but like not very stressful if it doesn't. Also think looking at like, well, do I just want to do this because it will make me feel like I'm being productive? I could check it off, or will it actually make a change in my business? Because yeah, I feel like thinking about that Eisenhower matrix, which maybe we can revisit that in another episode. We've talked about it a lot in the past, I think in our first couple dozen episodes. But being at a different place in our creative business, it almost has like a different application now. Because I think in the past, I didn't have that financial wiggle room to where I really could delegate out work, or I felt like I couldn't. And so now that I'm at that place where I'm actually paying myself out in the business, sometimes I want to reinvest money into the business and kind of pay myself with more free time, which goes to the point of delegating certain tasks, hiring a virtual assistant, exchanging services with other artists. And so that's an idea I want to share with other artists, even if you feel like you maybe don't have the money to hire an assistant, hire a virtual assistant. Everyone has something that they can exchange with another person, right? Like you have a skill or you have a specialty to where maybe you don't know how to set up a website, but you know you need one, but you're really good at social media posts. You could approach another artist where you love their website, you know that they did it, and you say, hey, I see that you haven't posted on Instagram in a while. I would love to post for you for 3 months. We can figure out a system. if you can then exchange, set up my website and like show me the ropes. Or if you have a good space for photographing artwork and you have the camera and all the lights and the fancy things, but you don't know the online systems for like how to set up a, let's say, a printful online shop or get your system going, but they just need a camera, you can exchange that. So there is always something that you can delegate out or exchange with another professional, that will save both of you time, but also just be a peace of mind for you. So delegating is super, super helpful. I think especially because once you start thinking about, would I pay someone else to do this? Or would I exchange services to someone else to do this? If the answer is no, then like, is it really the best use of your time anyway?
Mhm.
That's a big mindset shift, I think, that I've learned in the past few months, especially, but especially the few years, that has been super, super helpful in that work life, personal life balance. That's been great.
Yeah, it's like any of you that have worked in a 9 to 5, the CEO of the company isn't also the finance officer and HR, and they delegate.
Mhm.
You look at any big company, the big boss, the big founder, the big whoever fill in the blank, they have a team, and it will get to a point where you have to decide, is this something that I want to take on and learn? Like, I'd rather pay an accountant than turn into my own accountant. You know what I mean? Anyways,
Mhm.
we'll let you all kind of dive into that, but yeah, even things like taking photos, kind of like what you mentioned. I feel like that's an easy thing. Maybe we can do an episode on that. Things you can delegate. I think that could be a good episode. Yeah, let's
Yeah.
put a thumb on that. Because I'm thinking right off the bat, things like photographs. I think that's probably one of the first things I delegated. Having someone else take photographs for me. Certain things I can do, but others, like pictures of myself, I'd rather pay somebody else. Anyway, so that's a lot. So tough lessons are, of course, an inevitable part of the creative journey. But if we were to wrap it up and summarize it this way, let's go ahead and ask, what are three, okay, maybe not three, but biggest piece of advice if we could roll back in time? We could just like,
Yeah.
kind of jump into that time machine, go back and look at a younger self right in the eyeballs. I'll have you start first, Jackie. What would you tell your younger
Oh,
self?
my advice for my younger self. Oh
We'll keep
man.
it brief as much as
Keeping it
possible.
brief. I think the first thing I would say, which is like very cheesy, but if you know me in person, I'm like a little cheesy. The first advice or thing I would say to them would be that I'm very proud of them. I think as artists and emerging artists, a lot of the time, if we have the confidence enough to like dream big, then the next step is like getting other people to see that dream too. Because a lot of the time, I mean, it's that kind of a quote of people saying like, at first they'll ask you why you're doing it, and then after a period of time, they'll ask you how did you do it. So you really just have to have confidence in yourself and your vision. So I would tell my younger self that I'm very proud of her for getting me to where I am today because
Oh,
this is wonderful. The second one I think I would say would be um kind of thank you for laying down the foundation of systems and processes, and tell them from an advice standpoint that those systems are worth it. Those laying that foundation may feel silly at times, but it is going to make your future self a lot easier. Because looking back, thinking to always having just scalability in mind, from little things like having an organized image archive. So every time I go to pull pictures from a newsletter, I have all of my pictures categorized in folders based off of art series or based by month of behind the scenes pictures. That at the time when I was 2 months in my art business, I'm like, oh yeah, I just pull up my Google Photos and scroll through my pictures of the last 2 months and have it there. But I was thinking of forward to scalability of, okay, well, a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, I'm not going to know where this one picture is. So let's put it all in one place. Or the idea of having like a master contract that I can use for future mural clients. This felt super, super silly to write and like with blanks for client name here or cost of proposal here after I had only done one of these contracts. But the second time I got a contract or a client for a mural, it was amazing because I could just be excited knowing I already have a contract template. I could send it over quickly. It was done super fast. And so just setting those systems up in place will be worth it. And it'll make your future life a lot easier. And then I guess my last piece of advice would be just to like keep believing in yourself, and sharing it forward with other artists because kind of like we did on this podcast and continue to do, with visitors of our studio, listeners each week. It's just so wonderful building that community, of other emerging, established artists as well as art professionals that we're all just looking to rise up and move forward together. So just keep leaning into that would be my advice. So,
Aw.
how about you, Adriana? What would your advice to your younger self be?
I love it. I think some of them tie back to the tough lessons learned. So one of them would be it's okay, like limiting some choices is temporary and it will lead to outcomes faster than you think. Again, as long as it's like a focused approach or strategic approach. So yes, don't be afraid of setting some limitations at first and then going from there. Think the other one would be that I definitely was not prepared for, and no amount of giving other people advice can prepare you for, I think, depending on your personality, is it can be really overwhelming at times. Like, oh my gosh, this is a roller coaster. And it's a wild one, and it does double flips, and your feet all up in the air. And it's like exciting and terrifying at the same time. Like, you sell your biggest fill in the blank, thing that you make, and you're just, and then you go a month and it's crickets, and you're like, I'm done. Or you'll make like this piece of art and you're like, oh my God, it's the best thing ever. And people like flat, like nobody even likes it. You're like, but it's my favorite piece ever. Anyways, it's a lot of financial and I mean, it's a roller coaster. It's a roller coaster. Wouldn't trade it for anything. Honestly, if somebody was like, go back to corporate, I'd be like, good. Love it, love it, love it. It does come again with its ups and downs. So definitely put on your seatbelts, because it's quite a ride. I will say, I mean, and I don't know, episode for a different day. Would it be different if I had a secondary job with it? Maybe. It would be a little less up and down because there would be a little more stability on that side, but not having that can't speak to it. So I'm just gonna go, if you go full solo, it is a but love it. Some of us love that stuff. But I guess it would be like trust in your unique set of skills and experiences, like trust that inner compass. You got this. Essentially, like you've like the things you've gone through in the past have prepared you for what's coming in the future, if that makes sense. Especially coming from a business background, working in the financial world, definitely helped me for what the art business side is, for sure. And then think another piece of advice would be like, please don't forget to take time off. Don't let it be 2 weeks before you take a day off. Thank you very much. Schedule it if you need to. And tying back into that last one you mentioned, don't forget to ask for help or delegate. You have a big project, you are going, how in the world am I going to paint that mural, for example? You have artist friends. Talk to your artist friends. Hire your artist friends. Hire family members if necessary. Like, you know what? There's a network you've been building over time. Lean on your network. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to go on a Facebook group. And, even if you fall flat on your face and you go, I really don't know what kind of primer to use for this, that's okay. Like, just try. Like, but don't try to be like, so overwhelmed with all the different new things that are going on that now you're contractually obligated to find out that you forget to ask for help. Do ask for help. Super important. Anyways, I like research rabbit holes, so that happens. But all to say, 3 years ago, we started this podcast as we were, in the early levels of our career. So I hope if you're listening back to some older episodes, you can kind of hear some of that progression. You're just trying to find our way through the art world landscape. we had a few wins under our belt, but we were still learning. There was still so much to learn. And of course, this is just a quick look back 3 years back. But yeah, I can't wait to see what the future holds. Like, oh my gosh. Woo!
I
It's very
know.
exciting.
It's been pretty fun, kind of like looking back, reminiscing on where we were, what we're doing now, and now kind of starting that new adventure of looking ahead to the future. I feel like any milestone in life, in business, in your creative career inevitably do that. But with this 3-year milestone of the podcast, we also want to thank all of you, our listeners, for being along this ride with us. We look forward to many more milestones ahead, and we would love to hear what your creative milestones have been. So please shoot us a message on Instagram, whether it's one of your biggest wins since starting your art business, maybe a memorable moment, one of those wonderfully tough learning lessons from the start of your creative journey, or even just recently. We're here to support and lift you guys up because we really appreciate all of your support along the way.
Yes, we do. Well, we look forward to hearing from you. But for now, this is a wrap on today's conversation, and we hope you enjoyed this. It's a very interesting episode. Just look back. I don't know, this time capsule episode. It was great.
Yes, time capsule indeed. As always, our blog will be linked in today's show notes. We can find episode notes and links to all of our other podcast episodes.
And if you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share your feedback, or have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, you can reach us through social media at Minute May Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we are at Level Up Artist on Instagram.
You can also visit levelupartist.com to get immediate access to templates, resources, and of course, modules to level up your creative career today.
Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.